Were you terribly nervous when it was your turn to be thrown in at the deep end?
Yes, but I learnt from Adrian, because if you concentrate hard and you brief, get on pretty well. Though when I was first at the bar, Adrian had no faith in me. He used to brief me, but he had no faith in me, which meant that he'd stand behind me and say, ask him this question, ask him that question. And one day when I was cross-examining a policeman, I said to the policeman, did you hear that question? Yes, I did hear it, Mr. Twigg. I said, well, answer it direct.
Did that get a little overbearing at times?
Oh, for a time, but then I threw off the shackles and so did he. He realised I had to come out of the cocoon and he let me have a go. And we didn't fight about it. I realised what a powerful advocate he had been and still was. But he was getting on then and not doing as much of the rough and tumble as he had before. Here am I, 24, and he was probably getting close to 60, so things were different, and ultimately I broke away. And indeed, I moved away from what he was in because I realised that I stayed in police court work. I'd never make a name for myself, so I wanted to shed that and did so and called upon common law. Like everyone else, I tried to get into equity and commercial law. Didn't happen, but I was in the common law to a large extent, built up a very big practice in that, but got away from the police court work.
Looking back, do you think you were suited for equity work?
No. I didn't wash my hands every day. It was for clean hands. No, I shouldn't joke like that. No, I was not, because I didn't have that erudition and that background of that. I'd had that rough and tumble of police courts and hard-fought cross-examination, and so that was the best part of common law, so that's where I was.
People I've interviewed said that's very much missing now from the training of young barristers, the opportunity to spend endless hours doing cross-examination, experiencing the rough and tumble of the old like you did. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I do, and when it was first mooted as an argument, it was overdone, but I think it's accurate that it was vastly different in my day, and we've moved forward to the era of a little bit of suavity, and you have to get into equity, and there's a lot more commercial work about now, which we didn't have. So that, what I call police court work, and it's no longer called a police court, seems to have gone. They're still there, but the bigger equity, the big commercial stuff is there now for the grabbing.
Your mother was a Healy. I'd like to know a little more about Des Healy, who's a well-known legal figure in his day too.
Yes, he was. He was the favoured boy because he was younger than my mother, and they were very poor. As I said, I think they had a dozen children. But Des was a very hard worker. Whenever I was his junior, he would want not just the briefs, but he'd want the solicitor's file, because he knew how to look for it. And he'd take everything apart and do it himself. Now, you never got that very much. And so when he went on the bench just for a short while before he died, he was just as investigative and thorough. He would go into matters because he'd take the papers apart and find out what made it tick.
In your early days, do you have recollections in particular of difficult judges that you appeared before, or any notables that you remember, either to your shame or to that matter because you were very proud of them?
Oh, yes. Victor Maxwell was very erudite, but he was very tough. It's Victor Maxwell. Bill Dovey sat in family law, as everyone knows, and he was a tyrant. If you had to settle it. But he forgot one day, the cricket was on out at the cricket ground, and it's Friday motion day, and I had a matter. No, you've got to go out and talk about this, Mr. Twigg, blah, blah, blah. So out I went, and as we were talking about it, I look along the corridor to see His Honour going out in the lift on the way out to the cricket. I don't know what he did with my matter, but we had to settle it.
But that wasn't unusual, was it? People, they because of the amount of work they had to crunch through, they tended to be a lot more, okay, right now, let's do it. The things weren't as drawn out as they are now.
True, and so they got to the heart of things more quickly. And I think judges today are more sit back and listen. Some are not, but most try to be, because that's the proper role. I found it very hard, but nonetheless you've got to educate yourself not to intervene. Whereas Bill Dovey, and young Bill Dovey, his son, was even worse. Let me tell you a story. Bill Dovey always had something he knew about one of the links which prevented him from hearing it. So he said one day to me, Mr. Twigg, I know your client, who was the lady petitioner in the case. I said, does Your Honour? Just a moment. The lady said, I haven't any ideas. He said, yes, I'll just adjourn while you investigate it. And you can talk around the matter too, by the way, Mr. Twigg. Anyhow, we told him, Mr. Twigg, I've remembered where I met your client. She was at kindergarten where I was, at Rose Bay. I can't hear this case.
Oh, you're joking.
That's how rough he was. You had to settle before Bill Dovey because he was the laziest fellow. This is young Bill I'm talking of now. He was the laziest person.
It does give you an invaluable insight into people's different psychologies, and you become, I suppose, very adept and very flexible yourself.
You do. You have to be. I mean, it's no use going in a very precise way and pulling out law books when you're going to have an eyeball argument. Garbo was good at that too. He would always talk at people and have a debate because he was essentially an advocate. And quote case after case. You would always have a conversation with them if you're really good. And there were many top advocates who did just that. Toss cases about with Sir Owen Dixon and so forth.
People who had as much practice as you did, I found, tended to develop an almost infallible instinct for which way the judge was going to go. Was that true of you?
Yes. You knew.
And how did you know?
Oh, as you say, it's an instinct. Can't you tell everyone about a woman's instinct? How is that based? It's got no logic at all. But they just know, and 9 or 99 times out of 100, they are right. It's the same thing. It's a gut feeling. And so you don't go along that path because you know it'll be wrong, and you're really wrong about that when you've had a bit of experience, particularly the experience of people, not just the judges. But when it came to juries, you get the same sort of instinct, and particularly in the country. If you had a country jury, and we knew all about them in those days, which you don't these days, you'd get the local solicitor because he'd have valuable information. That's a wonderful way of doing it, really. I think it's far more complex now. There's far more commercial law than in my day, although I did some of it. But we're not talking, are we, about the rough and tumble of advocacy. There's still plenty of that in crime, but it's a bit more stereotyped.